In today's video, we're diving into 5 of the most disturbing stranded at sea cases of all time. These real-life stories will take you through the harrowing experiences of people who found themselves lost and fighting for survival in the vast, unforgiving ocean. Each case reveals the terrifying reality of being stranded at sea, so get ready for an intense journey into the unknown. On November 18, 2012, Jose Salvador Alvarenga, a 36-year-old fisherman from El Salvador, set out from the coast of Mexico in a small boat. He was accompanied by a young crewmate, Ezequiel Cordoba. Their journey was supposed to be a routine fishing trip, but it turned into a 438-day ordeal that ended 6,700 miles away in the Marshall Islands. This is the story of their survival at sea. Alvarenga and Cordoba had set out from Mexico with a well-prepared boat. It was 25 feet long and loaded with equipment, including 70 gallons of gasoline, 16 gallons of water, 23 kilograms of sardines for bait, 700 hooks, miles of line, a harpoon, 3 knives, 3 buckets for bailing, a mobile phone, a GPS tracking device, a 2-way radio, several wrenches for the motor, and 91 kilograms of ice. They also had a fiberglass crate full of fresh fish, tuna, mahi-mahi, and sharks. Alvarenga was an experienced captain, but his usual mate, Ray Perez, couldn't join him on this trip. Instead, he took Cordoba, a 22-year-old with the nickname Piñata. They had never worked together before. As they motored across the lagoon, a massive storm ambushed them. The storm hit hard, dumping hundreds of gallons of seawater into their boat. Alvarenga and Cordoba worked tirelessly to keep the boat afloat. Alvarenga steered while Cordoba scooped water out of the boat. They dumped their entire catch to make the boat lighter, tossed out extra gasoline, and strung buoys as a makeshift sea anchor. Despite their efforts, the storm persisted. Their radio contact died, and they were left to fend for themselves. They turned an icebox upside down and huddled inside for warmth. They took turns scooping out water, but the storm drove them farther out to sea. With no bait or hooks, Alvarenga developed a technique to catch fish with his bare hands. They ate raw fish, turtles, and the occasional flying fish that landed in their boat. They drank rainwater when it fell and resorted to drinking their own urine when it didn't. After 2 weeks, they found a stuffed green rubbish bag floating in the ocean. Inside were some chewed gum, half a head of cabbage, some carrots, and a quart of milk. It was the first fresh food they had seen in a long time. Alvarenga and Cordoba talked about their mothers and asked God for forgiveness. But after 2 months, Cordoba began to decline. He refused to eat and eventually died. Alvarenga was devastated by Cordoba's death. He kept talking to Cordoba's corpse for 6 days before finally throwing it into the ocean. Alone and desperate, Alvarenga continued to search for ships. He saw about 20 container ships, but couldn't get their attention. Alvarenga's survival depended on his ingenuity and will to live. He let his imagination run wild to stay sane. He developed a routine, capturing and eating whatever sea creatures he could find. After 438 days at sea, Alvarenga washed ashore on Eben Atoll, the southernmost tip of the Marshall Islands. He was taken to the nearest town and soon faced the world's press. Dressed in a baggy brown sweatshirt, he disembarked from a police boat slowly but unaided. His story went viral and he became an international sensation. Later, Alvarenga returned to El Salvador, where he described in detail the brutal realities of living at sea. He shared his extraordinary survival story in over 40 interviews. Despite facing public scrutiny over whether his story was real, Alvarenga's survival in the ocean is one of incredible endurance. It was late September 2010 in Tokelau, a small island group in the South Pacific. 3 teenage boys, Samuel Palesa and Filo Filo, both 15, and Atueni Nassau, 14, were looking for adventure. One night, after drinking vodka, they hatched a plan. They decided to sail from their village on Atafu Atoll to the neighboring Nukunonu in a small aluminum boat, known locally as a tinny. They grabbed a few supplies, some coconuts, a bottle of vodka, and water. At the time, it seemed like enough for a short trip, but soon after setting out, their boat ran out of petrol. They started drifting aimlessly, their small vessel carried away by the vast ocean currents. Unbeknownst to them, this would be the beginning of a 50-day ordeal. The first few days were filled with a mix of confusion and hope. They spotted a New Zealand search and rescue plane, but their attempts to signal for help went unnoticed. At one point, a boat appeared on the horizon, but it was too far away. As days passed, their situation grew dire. They quickly consumed all their food and water. Their only sources of sustenance became the rainwater collecting in the boat and the flying fish that leaped aboard. Once they managed to catch a bird, which they ate raw, sharing every piece among themselves. The nights were the worst. The boys huddled together, facing terrifying storms that threatened to capsize their small boat. Yet these storms also brought life-saving rainwater. Despite the harsh conditions, they maintained a routine of praying every day, hoping for a miracle. As they drifted further, they began to doubt their survival. Desperation set in when they started drinking small amounts of seawater, a dangerous last resort. By the 50th day, their spirits were nearly broken. They were dehydrated, malnourished, and severely sunburned. Then, in a stroke of luck, the deep-sea fishing trawler San Nikunao appeared on the horizon. The crew spotted the boys and immediately launched a rescue operation. The boys, naked and emaciated, were ecstatic but weak. First mate Ty Fredrickson described the boys' condition as dire, yet their mental strength was remarkable. The crew quickly provided them with small amounts of electrolyte-spiked liquids and bits of fruit, careful not to overwhelm their fragile systems. The boys were transferred to a Fiji Navy vessel and taken to a hospital in Suva. There they received treatment for dehydration, malnourishment, and severe sunburn. In the hospital, Etueni, also known as Edward, recounted their ordeal. He spoke about the constant fear, the prayers, and the small victories like catching fish or a bird. He was relieved and grateful for their rescue. Samuel and Philo, who were released from the hospital earlier, stayed with New Zealand consular staff, awaiting their journey back home. The news of their rescue spread quickly. In Tokelau, the boys had already been given up for dead. Families had held memorial services attended by hundreds. The rescue brought immense joy and relief. Villagers celebrated, singing and giving thanks. Etueni, Samuel, and Philo would soon return home. They were scheduled to fly to Samoa and then take a boat to Tokelau. Their uncle, Kuresa Nassau, Tokelau's ulu or head, announced plans to visit all three atolls to thank everyone who had prayed for the boys. Reflecting on their experience, the boys admitted they had acted recklessly. They were drunk and seeking more vodka when they decided to set sail. They had learned a hard lesson and were determined to make better choices in the future. As the boys reunited with their families, the community rejoiced. They planned to celebrate in traditional Tokelauan style, with feasts and prayers. The boys' ordeal became a story of caution and hope, a reminder of the unpredictable nature of the sea and the importance of making wise decisions. Their journey back to Atafu was not just a physical return, but an emotional and spiritual homecoming. They had faced great challenges and emerged scarred but alive. The villagers of Tokelau welcomed them with open arms, grateful for the miracle that brought their boys back. It was November 23, 1942, in the middle of World War II, when the British armed merchant ship SS Ben Lomond was torpedoed by a German U-boat, U-172. Poon Lim, a Chinese seaman, found himself stranded in the vast Atlantic Ocean. What followed was an extraordinary tale of survival against all odds. Poon Lim was born in Hainan, China, in 1918. Growing up in a fishing village, he learned to swim at a young age. In the 1930s, to escape the Japanese invasion, his family moved to Malaysia, where he continued to work in the fishing industry. In 1941, when the British Navy called for Chinese seamen to fill the ranks due to a shortage caused by the war, Lim answered the call. He joined the SS Ben Lomond as the second mess steward. The Ben Lomond set sail from Cape Town, South Africa, on November 10, 1942, heading to the Brazilian coastal town of Paramaribo with a 54-man crew. The ship was slow-moving and unescorted, making it a vulnerable target. Just 13 days into the voyage, the German U-172 U-boat launched 2 torpedoes at the Ben Lomond, sinking it within minutes. Lim was thrown into the water and watched as the ship disappeared beneath the waves. He swam through the debris and oil, coming across an 8-foot wooden raft. Climbing aboard, he found a few supplies: a 40-liter jug of water, several tins of biscuits, a flashlight, 2 smoke pots, a bag of sugar, some chocolate, and flares. The initial supplies kept him alive for a while, but as they dwindled, Lim had to rely on his ingenuity. He collected rainwater using a canvas from his life jacket. He fashioned fishing hooks from the flashlight wire and used rope as fishing line. Using a nail from the raft's wood, he created a hook for larger fish. He caught fish, gutted them with a knife made from biscuit tins, and dried them on the raft. When necessary, he resorted to eating seabirds, To ensure he wouldn't drown if he fell into the water, Lim tied a rope from the raft to his wrist. Despite his efforts, he faced numerous challenges. A storm hit, destroying his fish stock and spoiling his drinking water. Desperate, Lim began catching birds, drinking their blood to quench his thirst. Sharks became a problem, attracted by the blood. Lim used bird meat as bait to catch a small shark. When he finally caught one, he killed it using a half-filled water jug and drank its blood, a source of hydration when rainwater was scarce. During his time adrift, Lim was spotted but never rescued. A freighter ignored him, likely mistaking him for Japanese or fearing a German trap. A U.S. Navy seaplane dropped a marker, but a storm set him adrift from it. He was even seen by German troops, who also left him behind. On April 5, 1943, after 133 days at sea, Lim was rescued by Brazilian fishermen off the coast of Brazil. He had lost 9 kilograms and was weak, but he survived. He was taken to a Brazilian hospital, where he spent 4 weeks recovering before the British consul arranged his return to the UK. Lim was awarded the British Empire Medal by King George VI. His experience was used to rewrite Royal Navy survival manuals, and he was featured in a British Ministry of Information film about Chinese war efforts. After the war, he emigrated to the United States, where he became a citizen with the help of Senator Warren Magnuson. He spent the rest of his life in Brooklyn, New York, passing away on January 4, 1991, at the age of 72. It was January 29, 1982, and Stephen Callahan, a 29-year-old sailor from Maine, was about to go on a journey that would test his endurance and survival skills like never before. Callahan, who had been sailing since he was a child, had a dream to sail solo across the Atlantic. He designed and built a 6.5-meter sloop, which he named Napoleon Solo for this purpose. After a successful and exhilarating crossing from Newport, Rhode Island to the Canary Islands, Callahan was now ready to sail back to America. The first week of his return journey was smooth, with Callahan enjoying the trade wind sailing. However, on the night of February 4, 1982, everything changed. A loud bang woke Callahan from his sleep, and he quickly realized that something had struck his boat. The hull was breached, and water was flooding in rapidly. Callahan later speculated that the cause was either a whale or a large shark. With his boat sinking, Callahan had to act fast. He inflated his life raft and began gathering essential supplies from the boat. He managed to retrieve a spear gun, solar stills for water, emergency rations, and other items he thought might help him survive. Despite the chaos and fear, Callahan's instincts as a sailor kicked in, and he methodically prepared for what would be a grueling test of endurance. The next morning, as the sun rose, Callahan found himself adrift in the Atlantic, 800 miles west of the Canary Islands. He was alone on a 6-foot-wide inflatable life raft, with limited supplies and no clear direction. The vastness of the ocean stretched out in every direction, and Callahan realized the enormity of the challenge he faced. The first days were about adjusting to his new reality. Callahan had to figure out how to use the solar stills to generate fresh water, and how to catch fish with his spear gun. The solar stills produced just over a pint of water a day, barely enough to keep him alive. Fishing proved to be more successful, and Callahan managed to catch triggerfish and even some birds, which he ate raw. Despite his efforts, the situation was dire. Callahan's physical and mental state deteriorated as the days turned into weeks. The harsh sun, saltwater sores, and constant hunger took their toll. Dehydration and starvation were his constant companions, and there were moments when he almost gave up hope. On the 14th day, Callahan saw a ship on the horizon. His heart leapt with hope, and he fired a flare, hoping to be seen. But the ship passed by, oblivious to his desperate signal. This pattern repeated itself several times, with Callahan spotting ships but failing to attract their attention. Each time, the crushing disappointment weighed heavily on him. By the 50th day, Callahan faced a new crisis. While trying to catch fish, he accidentally tore a hole in his life raft. For 10 days, he struggled to keep the raft afloat, using a hand pump to remove water. The effort was exhausting, but Callahan managed to repair the raft. As the days dragged on, Callahan's situation grew more desperate. His solar stills stopped working, and he had only 3 cans of drinking water left. His body and mind were shutting down, and he felt the presence of all those who had been lost at sea before him. He was at his lowest point, feeling that death was near. But on the 75th day, a glimmer of hope appeared. Callahan spotted the lights of an island. He used his last reserves of strength to stay awake and steer his raft towards the lights. The next morning, on April 21, 1982, he was spotted by a group of fishermen near Marie Galante, an island southeast of Guadeloupe. The fishermen rescued him and brought him to shore, ending his 76-day ordeal adrift in the Atlantic. Callahan had drifted over 1,800 miles from his starting point in the Canary Islands. He was severely malnourished and had lost a third of his body weight. It took weeks before he could walk again, but he had survived one of the most incredible ordeals at sea. After his rescue, Callahan returned to Maine and began to rebuild his life. He reconnected with an old friend, Kathy Massimini, and the two began living together in a rented farmhouse. Despite their humble beginnings, their relationship flourished, and they married in 1994. Callahan wrote about his harrowing experience in his book, Adrift, 76 Days Lost at Sea, which became a bestseller and remained on the New York Times list for over 36 weeks. He also served as a technical consultant for the film Life of Pi, drawing on his unique experience to ensure the authenticity of the survival scenes. Callahan faced more life-threatening challenges later in life. In 2010, he had portions of both kidneys removed, and in 2012, he was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia. Despite these hardships, he maintained a positive outlook, drawing on the resilience he had developed during his time adrift. Today, Callahan serves as a national celebrity ambassador for the Leukemia Cup Regatta campaign and supports the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. His story is an incredible tale of endurance and the will to survive, even in the most dangerous situations. Maurice and Marilyn Bailey were an adventurous couple from Derby, England. They longed to escape their ordinary suburban life, so they decided to sail around the world. This wasn't a sudden decision. They spent 6 years studying boat designs, navigation routes, and necessary supplies. They quit their jobs, sold their house and most of their belongings, and had a boat built to their specifications. They named it Oralin, a combination of their first names. The Oralin had no radio transmitter because Maurice wanted to avoid any outside interference. In the summer of 1972, Maurice and Marilyn set sail for New Zealand, confident in their preparations. However, they couldn't foresee the events that would unfold. On March 4, 1973, 250 miles north of Ecuador, a 40-foot injured sperm whale collided with their boat, creating a hole below the waterline. Despite their efforts to pump out the water and patch the hole, their attempts failed. They silently gathered essential supplies and moved to a tiny motorless boat attached to an inflatable raft. They watched as the Oralin sank into the ocean. Their ordeal, which began in March 1973, lasted for 4 months. The couple endured extreme hardships, including sunburn, inflammation of the intestines, dehydration, and near starvation. They faced the added discomfort of sores and fungal infections from sitting in the wet, cramped raft. They had some food initially, but it soon ran out. Marilyn ingeniously created a fishing rod from a safety pin and a piece of cord, which allowed them to catch sea turtles, small sharks, and seabirds. They also collected rainwater in containers that quickly became covered in algae. The psychological strain of their situation was immense. Maurice, who had a troubled childhood and was naturally pessimistic, often felt resigned to dying at sea. Marilyn, on the other hand, remained hopeful and determined. Her optimism and resourcefulness played a crucial role in their survival. She documented their experience in diaries, detailing their dwindling supplies and the food she fantasized about. These diaries, along with interviews conducted after their rescue and their published memoirs, provided rich material for the book by Sophie Elmhurst, which captures their story vividly. Before setting off on their voyage, Maurice and Marilyn led contrasting lives. Maurice was shy and anxious, while Marilyn was outgoing and adventurous. They met through a mutual friend named Mike, who introduced them when he couldn't attend a car rally with Marilyn. Maurice, who had limited experience with women and cars, was immediately drawn to Marilyn's spirited nature. She, in turn, saw Maurice as a gateway to a life of freedom and adventure, away from her mundane administrative job and the constraints of living with her parents. As their raft drifted aimlessly, they had several close encounters with marine life. At one point, they were nearly capsized by a whale that surfaced near their raft. Maurice was struck by Marilyn's calmness and her desire to photograph the whale, reflecting her belief that they would survive. After 118 days adrift, their ordeal ended when a South Korean fishing boat, the Waolmi 306, spotted and rescued them on June 30, 1973. They were emaciated and weak, having lost significant weight and muscle mass. Their bodies had adapted to their confined, harsh environment, and they could barely walk when they were rescued. They were taken to Honolulu, Hawaii, where they began the slow process of recovery. Their survival depended heavily on their teamwork. Marilyn often bolstered Maurice's spirits when he felt defeated. After their rescue, Marilyn emphasized the importance of their partnership in interviews, while Maurice candidly admitted that Marilyn was the stronger of the two during their ordeal. Maurice's peace on the open sea, despite its dangers, contrasted with Marilyn's relentless hope and determination. The couple's experience left a lasting impact on them. They became vegetarians after their rescue, a decision influenced by the emotional toll of killing animals for survival. Their story, 117 Days Adrift, became a classic adventure tale, capturing the public's imagination in the 1970s and 1980s. Tragically, Marilyn died of cancer in 2002. Maurice, deeply affected by her loss, lived a solitary life until his death in December 2018. Spanish explorer Álvaro Cerezo, who had maintained contact with Maurice, discovered his death when Maurice stopped responding to his emails. Cerezo had been fascinated by the Baileys' story since childhood and felt compelled to honor their remarkable journey. He released a documentary in 2016, highlighting their incredible survival and the bond they shared.